So here's the latest on Hurricane Ian. And I'm from the Tampa Bay area originally, so those of you who are watching the series in Tampa Bay, thank you for supporting this thing we call the Culture Confederacy. It's Wednesday night. I'm trying to keep up to date on what's going on. But I'm going to do a one-take video tonight, go through my notes, because I want to talk about storms going as far back as the 1700s. You think this is bad now. Back in 1921, you had the Tarpon Springs hurricane. Then in 1780, you had one of the worst hurricanes on record. Now, of course, they didn't keep records like they do now, but they did keep journals back then. Remember, this is a time of science and exploration, the Enlightenment period, advancements, or they were exploring chemistry. So they were keeping some type of record back then. We'll also talk about the Great Storm of 1703. Took a whole bunch of notes today. But here's the latest on Hurricane Ian. Tampa Bay has lost more than 6 feet of water during the hurricane. And I just saw something here on the Weather Channel where a reporter showed that the wind had carried the waves out, or that water out from St. Pete Beach. St. Pete Beach, Treasure Island, Jungle Prada, that was my old stomping ground. So shout out to anybody who lives in that area if you're watching the series. And I was actually listening to, because you know this channel talks about culture, history, preserving great music, great art, preserving history and culture. But I was listening to Tchaikovsky's The Tempest and Francesca del Rimini. Those both have to deal with storms, or the plot centers around storms. But currently winds in Tampa and St. Pete, 50 miles an hour, between 50 and 60 miles per hour. Orlando, 40 miles per hour. I believe it's sustained winds. Gust possibly 60. Now, where I live, and I called my dad earlier today to see how things were going, because he lives down in Seminole. And he said that they were getting a lot of rain and wind, more tropical storm force winds, those type of conditions in the Tampa Bay area. Now, if you're familiar with the Tampa Bay area, or if you're not familiar with the Tampa Bay area, Tampa and St. Pete sit in what looks like a hook, if you look on a map. And it acts as a barrier with a lot of these hurricanes or storms that come through. So you more times than not will get a tropical storm. And I've actually stood at the edge of the pier at Jungle Prada when we had winds 60 miles per hour with one of these incoming tropical storms. And it's just unreal. I mean, that wind just tries pushing you all the way out, you know, to the edge of the pier. But the Naples Fire Department, underwater. Sanibel, underwater. Several feet of storm surge in Fort Myers. And the video is just unreal. I've never seen anything like it. And I've been through a lot of hurricanes when I was living down south. I went through Andrew and Elena. Everyone forgets about Elena. I've got that in my notes here. And of course, I got my pipe and coffee with me as always. Enjoying a breakfast blend tonight, smoking some Velvet, one of the classic pipe tobacco blends, out of my trusty Pony Express straight pipe. But millions are without power in Florida. And I got to give a shout out to Governor DeSantis. He handled himself perfectly. Just calm, cool, collective. What you need in a leader. That's what you need in a leader. And it's so funny to watch the media coverage of this because they're all, think, are you guys okay down there? And people are saying, look, we are prepared for this. We're Floridians. We go through this every year during hurricane season. Floridians are probably the most prepared people on the planet. It's kind of like where I live here in the upper Midwest. I mean, we're prepared for the winters here when the winters get harsh. So, you know, when you live somewhere after so many years, you learn how to prepare for whatever the weather event is. Oh, this is at the Weather Channel. Stephanie Abrams in the middle of Hurricane Ian's winds. Well, she better hold on to something. Better hold on to something before the Democrat Party loses you. Not trying to get political here, but let's get into the topic at hand. Because you know about Katrina, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. As I mentioned, Andrew, some of these other storms. But if you go back to 1780, it was considered one of the worst, if not the worst, hurricane season on record. Most destructive from all accounts. They had one in June and 3 in October that year that caused 1,000 deaths each. Now, the closest type of storm to that was in 1893 and 2005, Katrina. Couldn't find the name of the storm that hit in 1893. It was also called the Great Hurricane of 1780, 22,000 deaths. It struck first Barbados. It struck Barbados as a Cat 5, and it moved past Martinique, St. Lucia, and St. Eustatius. And this was happening in the middle of the American Revolution. So what happened was this storm, the Great Hurricane of 1780, destroyed a lot of the British fleet. So that's the storm of 1780. And winds, get this, winds were as high as 200 miles an hour. So strong that they actually tore the bark off of trees. This is before this whole issue of global warming. 25-foot storm surge we're talking about. Now that was recorded on Martinique. And I'm just going to flip around here, so I'm not going to stick with one particular decade or century. Hurricane Andrew. If you go on to YouTube here, you may find it somewhere else. You can find the audio of the broadcast from WIOD the night that Hurricane Andrew hit. And of all the memories I have growing up, that is probably the most vivid that I have growing up. Because I remember, I can close my eyes and I can just hear and I can see the line of storms outside, the squalls. We were getting the squalls in the Tampa Bay area from Hurricane Andrew. I remember, and I can just hear it now, the rain tapping against my window. I mean, it was like nails that were just like somebody throwing nails against your window is what it sounded like. Or pellets against your window. And the lightning. I mean, it was unreal. And hearing that broadcast again here on YouTube brought all those memories back. But of all the memories I have growing up, that's the one that's the most vivid, is the night that Hurricane Andrew hit. Hurricane Andrew hit in August of 1992, was a Cat 5, struck the Bahamas, Florida, and Louisiana. It was the most destructive to strike Florida, destroyed 64,000 homes, 124,000 structures. It resulted in $27.3 billion in damage, killed 65 people with top winds of 175 miles an hour. And you know about Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans, which caused 1,800 deaths and hammered New Orleans and the surrounding area. Winds also 175 miles an hour, 125 billion in damage. And the storm surge caused 53 breaches of these levees and flood walls. Now we go to Tampa Bay, 1848 and 1921. Those two storms. The Tarpon Springs storm in 1921, sustained winds of 140 miles an hour. It traveled over central Florida. And it weakened was weakened to a Cat 1. But it merged with an extratropical cyclone, which affected the Swan Islands in Cuba with heavy winds and rainfall. And the storm surge and very high tide caused damage from Pasco County to Tampa. Now get this, the power went out. So due to this power outage, people working at the St. Petersburg Times, this is 1921, working at the St. Petersburg Times, had to work the overnight shift by lantern because the power went out. Just moving right along here with my notes. But surprisingly, only about $50,000 for the damage was the result of that storm. But the storm surge was between, wherever you went, 5 to 8 feet and 10 to 12 feet in certain spots. Then we get to the Great Storm of 1703. One of my favorite storms of all time. If you go and you study the storm, this hit Great Britain as a Cat 2. Winds so strong that it tore off the lead roof, part of the lead roof at Westminster Abbey, if that tells you anything. Toppled 2,000 chimneys, heaped together almost 700 ships, killed up to 8,000 people. Most of them died at sea. But get this. Bishop Richard Kiter's, his palace. The storm toppled the chimney at his palace, and it went through the roof, down through the floor where he was sleeping. He killed him and his wife while they were sleeping in bed. That's in 1703. Again, before this thing called global warming. We didn't have automobiles. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have airplanes back then. Maybe it was all the wood that they burned, right? But that was this Great Storm of 1703. Daniel Defoe wrote a book about it. He said it was God's punishment for Great Britain turning away from God. Then you have Hurricane Camille in 1969. Now, that was just behind the 1935 Labor... You probably heard that today, the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. Now, this storm began on August 17th as a tropical depression south of Cuba. Well, going back to the 14th, started as a tropical depression, but it hit, I believe it was Mississippi, that area, on August 17th. And it was it grew to a Cat 5. And the place that was most affected was Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. The 1-minute sustained winds were at 175 miles an hour. But after a weekend, it became a fierce tropical storm. Storm surge of 24 feet. 24 feet. It killed 159 people and caused $1.2 billion in damage. Then you have the storm in Galveston, 1900. Caused between 6,000 and 12,000 deaths. Second deadliest storm behind Hurricane Mitch, which was back in 1988 in Central America, with a storm surge of 8 to 12 feet. Destroyed 7,000 buildings, 3,636 homes of that. Caused massive flooding in Cuba and Jamaica. South Florida experiencing tropical storm force winds, causing $34 million in damages. It also damaged crops in Canada. So, the storm of 1900, Galveston, the Galveston hurricane, it made its way all the way up to Canada and damaged the crops in Canada. This video is going much faster than I thought it would. Now, a lot of people don't know about this hurricane. It happened in Long Island. The Long Island hurricane of 1821. It's also called the Norfolk hurricane. And it made landfall in New York City. So those of you in New York City watching the series, go check this out. The story of the Long Island hurricane, 1821. It was first seen off the southeastern coast on September 1st. Winds well over 135 miles an hour. It hit Wilmington, North Carolina, Norfolk, Virginia. That's why they call it the Norfolk, well, it's also known as the Norfolk hurricane. But it's also referred to as the Long Island hurricane of 1821. And then it hit the Delmarva Peninsula and New Jersey. Now on September 3rd, it pounded Jamaica Bay, and on the 4th, it went over New England with storm surge in Portsmouth Island, destroying 76 homes and killed several in Currituck. And Battery Park had storm surge of 13 feet. 13 feet storm surge at Battery Park. And it's estimated with that storm, given today's inflation rate, or you put in today's money, $107 billion in losses. $107 billion. So that was the storm of, it killed 17 people, by the way. Storm of 1821, Long Island, or it's also known as the Norfolk hurricane. And I'm just about done here. So, and finally we have Hurricane Elena. And I remember Hurricane Elena. Mentioned that earlier. That was in 1985. Now, Hurricane Elena caused one of the largest evacuations in U.S. history, with well over 2 million people evacuating Florida and I believe Georgia. But it struck pretty much the eastern part of the Gulf Coast. There were 13,000 homes damaged in Mississippi, and 550,000 people saw its effects, with 1.3 billion in damages. And Alabama suffered with their crops, with soybeans and with pecans. So the soybean pecan crop that year, get the words out here, that was affected by Hurricane Elena in 1985. And I remember we had to stay at the local high school, and I can still hear the rain coming down on the roof. This big auditorium, and there's nothing like that. If you've ever been in a building where you have that type of roof where the rain just hits it, like if you're in Walmart somewhere, the sound of rain hitting that material, you just don't forget it. Something you don't forget. But this storm, Hurricane Elena, it moved very slowly. It stalled west of Cedar Key. And it remained stationary for 48 hours, causing damage over the eastern Gulf Coast with high winds, waves. And it landed near Biloxi on September 2nd as a Cat 3, but quickly lost strength. And the west coast of Florida, Tampa, St. Pete, that area, saw a lot of beach erosion, and this affected a lot of the coastal buildings along the Gulf Coast, around Tampa, St. Pete. So that area was affected. But these are the storms going back to the 1780s, going back to 1900. Like I said, well before global warming was a thing, the Great Storm of 1703. So I thought I'd come here and talk about these other storms that have happened throughout history. So this is nothing new, but our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with those of you in the Tampa Bay area, those of you in Fort Myers. We support you, and hopefully you're getting the help that you need. I can't believe these pictures. I saw the Naples Fire Department underwater. Sanibel Island underwater. And some of the beaches as well. So but that's really kind of an odd thing with this storm, that it actually forced the water out of the St. Pete area, or St. Pete Beach. Pushed it back. Those winds pushed it back. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can also find me at Instagram, hashtag Jason Composes, or Twitter, Culture Confederacy at Twitter. Another one-take video. Hope you enjoyed it. Culture Confederacy saying peace out. Stay safe, everybody. God bless this great country, and I'll catch you next time.